That ages me, doesn't it? So good morning, everyone here and any members of the public viewing online. Welcome to the October meeting of the Infrastructure Investment and Inclusive Growth Scrutiny Board. I'm going to start by asking councillor members of the board to introduce themselves. I will ask all our other attendees and guests to introduce themselves when we reach the substantive item on the agenda for which you're in attendance. So going through in order, Councillor Bentley.
Good morning, everyone. Jonathan Bentley. I'm councillor for Wheatwood.
Councillor Buckley.
Yes, good morning. Councillor Neil Buckley. I'm councillor for Old Woodley.
Councillor Dye.
Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Dye. I'm councillor for Killingbeck and Seacroft.
Councillor Gettings has sent his apologies. He's having to isolate. Councillor Goddard has also submitted his apologies, but I'm delighted to welcome Councillor Taylor as his substitute. Councillor Taylor.
Good morning, everyone. I'm subbing, as said, for Councillor Goddard, and I represent Chapel Allerton Ward.
Okay, I don't think Councillor Hussain is with us yet. Councillor Martin.
Hello there, Lisa Martin from Roundhay Ward.
Okay, Councillor Shazad, I don't think he's here yet. Councillor Sharp.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nicole Sharp and I represent the Temple Newton Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Councillor Jonathan Taylor, Horsforth and Roden Ward.
Councillor Wadsworth.
Councillor Paul Wadsworth, representing Guys in Roden Ward.
I'm Councillor Paul Truswell and I represent Middleton and Belle-Isle and I chair this board at present. Okay, so turning to the formal agenda proper, agenda item 1, appeals. I don't think there are any, Andy, are there? Exclusion of the public. I don't think there are any items for which that's applicable. Welcome, Councillor Shazad. I'll ask you to introduce yourself in a second. Late items, there are no late items, although you will have noticed, members, that there are copies of the minutes of the board meeting of the 16th of September, which in a few seconds I will ask you to approve or otherwise. Declarations of interest. I'm not aware of any declarations of interest that haven't already been declared formally by members. Apologies. I've indicated the apologies from members, but we have also had an apology from Councillor Hayden. Councillor Hayden has submitted to me her abject apologies for being unable to attend this morning. As everyone will know, it is the school half-term holidays, and she, despite her best efforts, has been unable to secure childcare in order to allow her to attend this morning, and I hope members of the board will understand that. I did ask whether it would be possible for a Deputy Councillor Carwell to attend, but he is in the same position. He does have young children and it is half term and he's got parental duties to perform. So implicitly, he sends his apologies as well. So turning to agenda item 6, the minutes of the last meeting on the 29th, but also the minutes, and I think there are apologies from officers that it wasn't possible to process these in time. So I'll start off with the minutes of the 16th, and I know that board members have not had an opportunity to read through them in detail, and they are quite comprehensive. So if during the course of the meeting you happen to scan them and see any issues that you want to raise, I'll be sufficiently flexible from the chair to allow you to raise them. But can we, in principle, accept them as a record and that I can sign them on your behalf in due course, subject to the proviso that I will allow you to raise any other issues? Turning to the minutes of the last meeting on the 29th, I'll go through those in the time-honoured fashion. On page 5. Of course, Jonathan.
Thank you. I fully accept that the executive member and the deputy exec member couldn't attend today. However, it's not recorded in these minutes that last time, although the executive member was present for the start, didn't stay for the whole inquiry. And I have to reiterate my feelings that the administration, we've waited a long time to get to this point, and someone from the administration should really have been here for both sessions, and there's been nobody here for either. So I think it should be recorded in these meetings that the exec member left after about half an hour. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can note that. As I say, Councillor Hayden is conscious that she left early at the last meeting and was very, very apologetic and has tried her utmost to secure childcare. And I think that is something that I think we all accept as members.
Yep, don't want to appear unfeeling, but as I say, we've waited a long time to get here. So
yeah, and I think I also need to make it clear that Councillor Hayden, in my discussions with her, is very much up to speed on what we've discussed. She may even be watching the proceedings from her home. I don't know, but I know that she will do her utmost to catch up with what we discussed today. In fairness to her, she does actually take this matter very, very seriously. But thank you for that, Jonathan. Okay, going back to the minutes, page 5, anything on there, either to raise or correct? Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Jonathan.
Just on the last bullet point on page 8, there was a request for criteria relating to pedestrian crossings. I wonder if that request has been either made or we've had to come back on it.
Becky.
Not as yet, but I'll follow up for you, Councillor Bentley.
And can I say that we did reserve that as one of the items for possible discussion at the end of this session. We're obviously prioritising the contribution of road safety campaigners. That's something that we can raise and follow through, because I actually suspect that 2 sessions are not going to be sufficient for us to cover this important matter in its entirety. No, thank you for that, Jonathan. Okay, page 9. Right, are board members happy for me to sign these as a correct record on behalf of the board? Yeah, thank you. So that takes us to agenda items 7 and 8, which I think basically we can run together, the terms of reference of the inquiry and the report that's accompanied it. Just as a quick recap for those who haven't attended, who didn't attend the first meeting, the number of people killed and seriously injured on our streets has been a source of great concern to the Scrutiny Board for some years. And 2 years ago, we agreed that we would actually try to drill down more deeply into those figures and what can be done to reverse the trend. We waited until we were able to return to physical meetings before doing that. But basically the background is that to 2010, the figures for people killed and seriously injured on our streets were declining, and therefore the targets that were set reflected that downward trend. Unfortunately, since 2010, the figures have worst increased and at best plateaued. So the disparity between the actuality and the targets that were set for improving road safety has got wider and wider. Obviously, I think we're all aware that the number of people killed and seriously injured has declined during the pandemic period for reasons that I think probably are pretty obvious. But I don't think any of us are living in any kind of fool's paradise that is likely to remain at that level unless serious steps are taken to address the challenges that we were concerned about previously. At our first session, we had contributions from colleagues from highways and police in particular about current measures that are deployed to address road safety issues and what might be done to improve those. We also had some reference to the proposal to introduce a Vision Zero approach to the number of people killed and seriously injured on our streets, and I will touch upon that in a few minutes. But as part of our inquiry, we felt that it was absolutely crucial to hear the experiences and views of road safety campaigners within our communities. And I know that a number of us are aware that some of those campaigners have been prompted to adopt their activity as a result of the tragic loss of members of their family or loved ones. And I'm sure we will hear more of that in a few minutes. So with that, I'm going to ask our guests to introduce themselves, and then we'll move into the discussion of the issues. So I think I'm going to let Councillor Shazad and Hussain introduce themselves because they didn't get that opportunity at the start of the meeting. So Mohammed.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for being late. Councillor Mohammed Shazad, Moortown and Greenwood Road.
Arif.
Morning, everybody. Sorry for the late. Councillor Arif Hussain from Gipton and Hare Hills.
Okay, and then starting with Paul. Have you been shown how to work the microphone, Paul? Excellent.
Very flash microphone this morning. My name's Paula Knights. My son is Declan Grove. He was tragically killed in a car accident in 2018.
Welcome.
Hello, I'm Jill Walshaw. My son, Matty Walshaw, was killed age 18 in a road traffic accident in 2018 with Paula's son, Declan.
Welcome.
Yes, good morning, everybody. My name is John Scrutiny. I represent a charity called SCARD, which stands for Support and Care After Road Death and Injury. We're based in Ossett, but we are a national charity.
Hello, hello, I'm David Smith. I'm the victim and witness advisor to the Mayor and Deputy Mayor, Alison Lowe.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ian Greenwood and I'm a road safety campaigner as well.
Good morning, my name is Vicky Franks. I work in transport strategy as a safe and sustainable travel team leader.
Good morning, Lindsay McGarvey. I'm Principal Transport Planner in the Influence and Travel Behaviour team, and we're working on Vision Zero.
Good morning, Nicholas Hunt, Traffic Engineering Manager for Leeds City Council. I deal with the day-to-day inquiries in regards to road safety within Leeds.
Hello, Gillian McLeod, Transport Development Services Manager at the Council, and I'm the Chair of the Leeds Safer Roads Partnership.
Good morning, I'm Gary Bartlett. I'm Chief Officer for Highways and Transportation at Leeds City Council. I sit on the West Yorkshire Safer Roads Executive Group.
Good morning, I'm Paul Jeffrey. I'm West Yorkshire Police Partnership Lead. I'm also responsible for traffic prosecutions across West Yorkshire in the Magistrates' Courts.
Morning, everybody. I'm Inspector Nick Berry. I work in Leeds District and I represent the police at the Leeds Safer Roads Partnership meeting.
Good morning, everybody. Ed Chesters, Chief Superintendent of West Yorkshire Police, Head of Operational Support for Roads Policing. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Before we ask our campaigner contributors, I thought it might be a good idea very briefly to ask Gillian to summarise what we mean by, or pulling rank, Chief Highways Officer, to summarise what we mean by Vision Zero and what the objectives are. Gary.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've been volunteered to do this bit rather, yeah. So in this room last week, we approved, or the transport strategy for the council was approved by Executive Board. And a very important part of that transport strategy is Leeds Vision Zero. And just to remind members, the aim here is to work collaboratively and innovatively to ensure that by 2040, no one is killed or seriously injured on the roads in Leeds. Now, if you think of where we're at today and where we have been, that is a very, very challenging ambition. But I think it's absolutely right that we should have that ambition. And it's a very different approach to the one that we've had or highway authorities have had over many years, because it's looking at the whole system, the whole process of what's involved with road safety. And it requires effectively everybody to play their part. It's not just colleagues in the police. It's not just my colleagues in the Highways and Transportation Service, as sometimes it feels when you read some of the emails and correspondence that it's all our fault that people are being killed and injured on the roads. This is about encouraging, persuading, cajoling, whatever word you want to use, manufacturers to make sure that designs of cars are right, housing estates are designed right, that we in our behaviour, residents in their behaviour, go about their business in an appropriate manner and consider how they travel. And it may be on occasions that they don't actually use the car, that they actually walk or cycle safely. So it's asking everybody to play their part, and it is a fundamental change and approach to how we're going about things. And it's very difficult. It's almost impossible to get that change of approach across to explain it, but I hope it gives you a flavour for it. But it's looking at safer systems, understanding that people do make mistakes, but changing the way things are done, targeting communications and operations, but just recognising that for everyone, there is this shared responsibility now. It isn't just down to a few, it's everybody. In Leeds, that's over 800,000 people will have to play their part if we're going to get anywhere near hitting that ambition. So it will build on the pillars that are contained within Vision Zero and ultimately our transport strategy. And I'm not going to go through them line by line, but I'm just going to call the titles out in terms of safer speeds, safer streets, safer vehicles, safer people, safer behaviours, and also post-collision response. These are things that we'll be looking at. So obviously, Chair, I could talk for much longer on that, and colleagues could as well. But those are the main things. It's just to stress that fundamental shift in approach that everybody has to play their part to work towards that ambition. So I'll leave it there, Chair. I hope that gives you a flavour for what we're talking about when we talk about Vision
Thank you
Zero.
very much, Gary. And we did have the opportunity quite comprehensively, I think, at the last board meeting to explore some of the wider detail. But that leads us nicely into, I think, the contribution from our first campaigner. And Ian, I'm going to ask you to lead off. You may want to introduce yourself, but I first met Ian a couple of years ago when we, again, as a board, were discussing the annual scrutiny of killed and seriously injured figures. And I was aware of his role as a campaigner, but also the academic work that he's done that has emanated from his experience as an individual campaigner. So Ian, without any further ado, would you like to make your presentation to us? And I think Ian indicated that he wanted around 20 minutes. My own view is that he's certainly worth listening to. Ian.
No pressure then, Paul.
Sorry.
So good morning, everybody. My name's Ian Greenwood. I have two hats. Today, my hat is a road safety campaigner. And I just want to make that clear. My other hat is as a researcher at Institute for Transport Studies in Leeds. I'm not here representing them today, so I just want to make that clear before I kick off. I will talk at you for about 15, 20 minutes, if that's okay. I hope Paul's right in terms of I'm worth listening to, but you would judge me, I guess, at the end of it. So I'm really pleased to be here this morning. So good morning. I'm really looking forward to listening to your deliberations and where you get to in terms of the work of this committee. I think that's really quite important. I'm really also pleased to hear the introduction in terms of a target to stop killing and seriously injuring people on our roads in Leeds. I really appreciate this opportunity. I know it's a big ask, I guess, listening to somebody like me, you've got off the streets, but I really do hope I can contribute to this in a positive way in terms of moving this forward. And that's been my approach since I've been campaigning. And I'm really interested in hearing what you come up with as a committee. And I'm really interested in watching the council deliver its commitment in the timetable that's been published. I'm really pleased that that's published because I can keep an eye on you now and see what's happening. But my starting point, I'm afraid, is that we could do a whole lot better, both across West Yorkshire and in Leeds as well. And I'll share with you why I think that this morning. I've suggested 3 questions, and Paul was happy with my approach. So I will share with you today why I do this, why is stopping people being killed and seriously injured important to me personally. So I will share that with you. I also want to look backwards because I really do think that's quite important in terms of my own personal experience. I accept I'm only one person and I only know a certain amount. So there may be loads of other stuff that's happening that I don't know about, but I will share with you my experience over the last 4 or 5 years in terms of trying to get people interested in road safety. I've struggled, and I'll share with you my view of that. And lastly, Paul's asked me to offer a view. Again, it's one person's view about what we should be doing differently, but I will offer a view. Very happy to tell people what I think. So why do I do this? Why am I sat here? Well, I should be doing something else probably, but why do I do this? Why do I put myself through this? I had a great job in the NHS. I've been there for 30 odd years. I had a great pension and I stopped doing that. And I'm going to tell you why I stopped doing that. But before I do that, I just wanted to say that I am going to tell a story that's quite difficult to hear. So if anybody needs to kind of nip out, then I'm looking in one particular direction, then I'm quite happy with that, if that's okay. Anybody else as well, actually. So Becky's going to show you my first slide. I've only got 2, so don't worry. I want to introduce my daughters to you this morning. So this is Alice and Clara. Quite dated photographs now, but you'll understand why they're dated in a minute. Okay, so I want to take you back to 2008, where my life completely changed. 5 young drivers decided that they would have a race. They'd race each other at night, in the wet, at speeds in excess of 80 miles an hour, overtaking each other as they raced down a country road. Each of the cars had passengers who were egging each other on as they raced down the road to go faster and to overtake. And we know that from the texts that were examined by the police investigation, although the young people involved decided that it would lie about that once they were arrested and it went to court. The result of the race on that country road was a horrendous crash. The second car in the convoy misjudged the bend. And remember, it was dark, it was wet, there was no street lights, and they were speeding. And it hit the car coming in the opposite direction. The driver had only passed his test fairly recently, so was quite inexperienced. And after hitting the oncoming car, it hit a tree, and the 2 young people in that car were flung from that car, not protected by seatbelts, and were dead on impact on the side of the road. In the car traveling in the opposite direction were my family coming home from a great couple of days in Alton Towers. I probably should say that this didn't happen in Leeds. Just a normal drive down a country road, but it was anything but normal. The crash destroyed both cars. I've seen photographs of them. And in doing so, Alice's neck snapped and she sustained catastrophic head injuries. The emergency services managed to cut her out first. They were amazing, and they transferred to hospital, but they couldn't save her, and she was pronounced dead in the emergency department. But she probably died, we think, at the roadside. So that night, 3 young people were killed. Many lives were devastated as a result, and something that still happens about 5 times a day. Alice died just before her 13th birthday, and it was completely avoidable. Becky, the next slide's not very nice to look at, but if you kind of would share the second slide, Becky, please. So these are my 2 daughters today. On the left is Alice's grave, and Clara, who's on the right, sorry. I was going to do this. Clara decided that she wants to be a nurse, so she's off at uni doing what kids do at uni, having a ball, I think, and hopefully working hard as well, doing her nursing degree. So many people get a knock on the door from the police with similar news every single day. I received a phone call because I wasn't traveling, I was at home. But I have many video clips in my head of what happened that night and subsequently, some of which are real, some of which are imagined. I think some of the imagined ones are probably worse. Many are of nightmare material, but one that stands out is being asked to identify Alice's broken body, which a dad should never have to do that for his daughter. So I share this not for group therapy, I've had lots of that, or for sympathy, but to explain my motivation in doing what I do. For me, this is real. And for others, I guess, it's visceral. Road death and serious injury are devastating to families, friends, and their communities. It devastated my life and that of my family. So I'm trying now to do whatever I can to stop it happening to others, because these are preventable crashes. And I think, Becky, we should probably turn this slide off, but thanks for your help. So I'm going to move on. So the second question is about sharing the reaction I got when asked to meet local leaders. And I did this across West Yorkshire 4 or 5 years ago, but I will focus on Leeds, obviously. That's when I started a campaign. It's all pre-COVID. So it seemed to me, with my experience, that when you put road safety at the top of letters or emails, even though I've described my story as I have shared it with you today, I got a real mixed bag of responses. Some people were great and were prepared to meet and look me in the eye and talk to me and commit time. And I will name some people, actually, so I don't want to embarrass them, but I probably just will. For example, the two Pauls, Paul Jeffrey, Paul Truswell, people like Tim Kingsman, Kim Groves, Rachel Reeves, Andrea Jenkins, Nick Hunt, who's also here today. Other people refused. The previous Police and Crime Commissioner and his team, and the chair of the West Yorkshire Road Safety Partnership all gave me time and committed their interest in what I had to say. And I'm also going to name some others as well, I'm afraid. So for others, I sometimes release some nice words. I sometimes receive platitudes. Some didn't even want to meet me, and some didn't even bother to reply, if I'm honest. And I was generally quite shocked in some of the reactions I got. So these included all my councillors in Roundhay, my own MP, the Director of Public Health here in the council, and the previous council leader. So I reflected on that and thought, having done a busy job in the NHS, I thought, well, actually, these people are really busy. It's probably not the top of everybody's priority, although it is for me. So why should they commit time to me? And I thought, well, okay, you can kind of rationalize that. You can kind of explain that. That's fair enough, I thought. But the nature of some of the replies was really quite upsetting. So I got a very short reply from my MP from what I think was either my third or my fourth letter to him. And he told me that it was tricky cycling in Leeds. So he got the same story that you've got this morning. And he talked to me about cycling, which I hadn't mentioned. And he said he would write to the Home Secretary, which confused me because I didn't know why he was writing to the Home Secretary, but he wouldn't meet me. Or the previous council leader telling me that she was taking road safety really seriously, but it was really difficult and complicated due to all the bureaucracy, and the combined authority was taking the lead. This was after ignoring my first letter as well. But she also wrote that at a time when the council's own target, which the council set in 2016 to reduce KSIs by 50%, if I'm reading the data correctly, delivered a reduction of 1 single fatality. So I'm making a point about the context in which she wrote that letter. So I was left with a very distinct impression that some organisations were looking to different organisations take the lead and the responsibility. Councils telling me there was a combined authority, or the police, the combined authority telling me that it was the councils who had the statutory duty. I think it's called partnership not working. And all I wanted, some honesty actually, all I wanted was some action. But what it did do, it was convinced me that there were some really dedicated people around the patch who really wanted to make a difference, and others who just made excuses or ignored me. And I don't like being ignored. So I was actually even more determined to keep going and my campaigning, as many others do. So I decided not to focus on those people who ignored me. Why bother? Because they weren't interested. But then COVID came along, and as we know, everything else stopped. So fast forward. So I wanted to share that with you because it's not okay to ignore road safety. I was really pleased, Paul, with the way you set up this session today. I think the language you chose was really quite important. And it's not okay just to carry on counting KSIs. Those KSIs are Alice and Clara and others. I don't think that's okay. And platitudes isn't helpful. As well as death and devastation and the impact on people like me and my family, there's thousands, and there are thousands, thousands of other people who are affected by this every single year. You all know this, but there are many other impacts as well. Pressure on the emergency services, on our hospitals, on primary care, on mental health, very clear links to crime, antisocial behaviour, congestion, people being put off walking or cycling. I won't cycle down Roundhay Road because it's just far too dangerous. And the costs of taxpayers and businesses upwards of £36 billion a year. For me, it's about a question of public health, and I don't think it's dealt with like that. So moving on to question 3. I was delighted to read your hugely aspirational transport plan, which included the commitment to adopt Vision Zero, as has been mentioned already, which for me came out of the blue, because even though I've been engaging with lots of people, not one single person mentioned that work was happening back then. I've just reinforced the fact that this is pre-COVID, so I know things have moved on a lot since then. Lindsay very kindly called me and did explain fairly recently quite a lot of the detail, so I was quite pleased that that is actually moving on. I think this is really positive. I think it's really positive that, Paul, you acknowledged that, and your colleague Gary recognised that we need a very significant shift. I'm really pleased to hear that today. And I'm also really pleased, as I said earlier, that there is a published timetable on which you're going to take action. And also well done for Leeds for going first in West Yorkshire. So in the email chat that I had, you've asked for my views, and I said earlier I'm quite happy to share my views. So the term Vision Zero can receive a mixed reaction. I've heard this quite regularly from many people. It often comes with questions about the reality of it or the deliverability of it, and it can generate quite a lot of skepticism, which can sometimes get in the way of what we're trying to achieve. But nevertheless, it's implemented successfully in many other places, and cities like Oslo and Helsinki have actually achieved Vision Zero, not in 2040, but today. So for me, branding is less important. What is important? Oh, sorry, but you've already decided to use Vision Zero, so I guess that's what you've decided to do. But what's more important is what happens now. For me, it's about offering radical safe systems approach, which Gary talked about, and reducing road danger, where safety is at the centre of everything that we do in transport, not as a postscript or as an add-on. And excuse me, for me, that sometimes is how it definitely feels. So since Alice died and I had my recovery years, I've learned a great deal about reducing road danger. And I've learned that it is incredibly complex and very complicated and quite difficult to keep up with. And there are different competing views as to what should be done. So I'm a pragmatist, I understand that and I accept that. And some of the possible solutions that you'll debate, and I'm sure you'll debate them because there are different views, and the consequences of those potential solutions I'll watch with interest as you go forward. My suggestion, if I may, is that you keep a focus on why this work is important. That's the thing I'd ask you to do in whatever you do going forward. These are not accidents, as your transport plan states, it calls them accidents. They are mostly preventable crashes, but they all need players to commit, to invest, to work together. Please don't blame each other, and to move forward, to move from those nice words to concrete actions. I'm going to name somebody else, I'm afraid, but I recently met Alison Lowe. And I was very optimistic after that meeting that her energy and her fire will start to make this much more important in West Yorkshire. And my view is, I'll repeat, it hasn't been looking backwards. So we know the folk in West Yorkshire regularly identify road danger as a major issue. And I'd suggest that we, the public, don't really know what the council's doing. And I am someone who proactively seeks out that information, using the data you have, of which there is tons, because I'm immersed in it in my other job. Using the data you have to really understand the complexities is really very important about casualty type, mode, place. That is really quite important. It's also important to look at the near misses. If you talk to colleagues in the fire brigade, for example, they'll tell you dodgy roads where they cut out a lot of people, but nobody actually dies or is seriously injured. We don't necessarily take notice of that data. And we don't publish the data. But why not? It's published nationally, but it's certainly not published locally. And for me, transparency, particularly when you're so off with your own target in Leeds, it builds confidence. I know it's difficult. I worked for the NHS for 30 odd years, trying to publish trying to publish failed cancer targets is not a good place to be in. So I know it's difficult. I know when you have scrutiny, it's difficult. But it will probably give me, or it definitely will give me much more confidence, and probably others, that you're taking it seriously by making the data and the activity much more public and being honest. As an example, the scrutiny paper that I read last time I was invited here mentions the reduction in deaths and serious injuries in 2020, but not the previous data or the missed council's target, and appears to celebrate a 46% reduction. And we all know the data for 2020 was a very, very unusual year. So some would say to me, well, you're reading that paper in, why on earth are you complaining? There's been a 46% reduction. We're on a trajectory that's really positive, aren't we? But that's not true, is it? The 2020 data threw out lots of strange things nationally, and only focusing on 1 year, I think, is misleading. So publishing real data over trajectories, I think, is really very important. We've not fixed this, and I'm glad Paul mentioned that in the introduction here today. The other thing, and I've nearly finished, a couple of pages left, is community engagement. I think is critical, as problems are usually understood by people who live in problem areas. They know where the dodgy roads are, they know where the crashes happen. And whether that's resulted in a death or a serious injury, that the local people know. There's one example on social media last week, and I don't know the particular road, where according to social media, and we know what social media is like, so I'm slightly nervous about quoting social media, but a specific road in Leeds that apparently had been repeatedly highlighted over many, many years and not acted upon. And the local people were complaining both at the lack of action, but also the lack of communication and contact. So I mentioned the use of language last time, which is important to me personally, but I know it's important to other victims. So talking about accidents, saying that you're planning only to reduce a certain percentage of KSIs, or setting a target of how many people will be killed. So is that, well, it's okay to have so many that are killed on the road and so many people pedestrian and so many who are killed on a cycle, is just not the way to go in my view. And that's why I'm glad you've adopted Vision Zero. So this to me seems to accept deaths and serious injury. These further imply to me a weak or passive reaction, one of inevitability. Someone said to me, who wasn't from Leeds actually, but she couldn't do anything about any of the crashes in her local authority because they were all different and they came with different circumstances. And I'd say, and I said to her, just because it's difficult, it doesn't mean it's an excuse not to try. And I think language and communication is also important to local folk who want to see action. They want to be able to send their child to school when they're walking, or to feel safe to cycle, but they don't hear enough about it. We don't talk about road death and serious injury. And language such as preventing death and serious injury, as in Vision Zero, and addressing road danger demonstrates to me a seriousness of a commitment to be proactive, but obviously combined with very serious action. And as I said, I'm pleased that you've got to the place you have as a local authority. So it feels that it's much more positive. So I just want to make a couple of other points. A few years ago, Paul asked me to speak at the West Yorkshire Road Safety Conference for all those cross-agency who were trying to design plans at local authority level and across West Yorkshire to make things better. I just wanted to say that I met an amazingly committed and enthusiastic group of people in that room that day. From across West Yorkshire, and the 5 local authorities were all represented, plus the other agencies. And they all wanted to do more, and I saw commitment and compassion. But for whatever reason, and I got quite a lot of information from that day, they were impeded, they felt impeded. So I'm not seeking to be critical on any of those people who do, this is their profession, this is their day job. That's not where my criticism lies. And I think it's really important that I made that point. But my criticism is of political leaders, I'm afraid, who have previously chosen not to prioritise this area across West Yorkshire. And as I've said earlier, focus on partnership not working. Fast forward to now, after the worst of the global pandemic, we'd have a real opportunity to move everybody forward. And again, just to underline, I was really pleased to hear the introductory way Paul started the meeting today. So you asked for my views of what to do. And I don't want to give you a list of infrastructure that needs fixing, or speed that needs reducing, or enforcement needs to be better, and lots of other things. But there are people who will say that to you, and those communities are right to do that if that's what their views are. I will rely on the experts, and I think they should be tasked with reducing road danger as a greater priority. When I asked someone senior working on the city centre schemes, why wasn't road safety mentioned in any of the documents that I'd read? There were still people, cycles, taxis, buses, all mixing in the same areas, even after the schemes were completed. The message I got was, he told me that it was because road safety wasn't the focus of the investments and so not given a priority. One person's view, I'm just repeating it. Last page. So I'd like to see a focus on pointing all the agencies in the same direction, adopt the safe system approach, which you've talked about, which includes better use of data and reducing road danger, engage with local people who want to help. I think often I've not run to the media. It's not what I think will make a difference here. Share what you're up to in making Leeds safer and really focus on fixing this. I don't want to hear that it's all the government's fault or you've not got any money, which is what I was told previously. Others in Britain have shown it is possible to make significant improvements, and wouldn't it be great if Leeds became the new Oslo or Helsinki? So I think it's really time to commit now and take this much, much more seriously. It needs political leadership from you guys, and it needs a little bit of bravery, again, from you guys. And I look forward to that happening. I hope it happens across West Yorkshire as well. I'm pleased Leeds going first, and I'm willing to be a critical friend along that journey, if that is of use. It's too late for Alice and for others, but I really do think you can make a difference and stop this happening to anybody else, because it's shit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. I think it's impossible on a human level not to be moved by what you've said, but also the message that we need to be determined, genuinely determined to tackle this scourge in our society. And I think it's very interesting, and I think I will probably agree that it should be seen as a public health issue. And I don't think that dimension has really been taken into account in the past explicitly rather than just implicitly. I don't know, do members have any questions of Ian at this stage?
And just to say, I'm really happy to answer any question if there are any. And if I don't want to, I'll tell you. But ask away.
Okay. Could I ask one question of you, Ian, and probably this is wearing your academic and research hat. You've mentioned other cities. What are the sort of key initiatives that they've taken in order to progress to that much more advantageous state of affairs where they do approach a vision zero or whatever their equivalent is?
So that's not the focus of my own research. And as I said earlier, I'm not here as a researcher. So what I'd say to that is there is a ton of evidence in terms of what the interventions are. The professionals will know what they are already. The evidence back 30, 40 years in terms of speed, for example. It's obvious, the faster you go, if you hit something, that the worse it's going to be. I mean, some of the evidence is pretty clear. And as I said in what I've shared with you today, I think it's a mistake for somebody like me who comes from a very specific perspective to start to say you need to do intervention X in Y road, or do something about, I don't know, do something about the people who choose to speed with very noisy engines down Princess Avenue at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Friday and Saturday. I mean, it's easy for me as a resident to have a moan about that, but that's not necessarily the priority for you to do. So I'm not going to answer your question in terms of what interventions need to happen. What I would say, it's about the things I've talked about this morning. It's about leadership. It's about commitment. It's about you guys all saying this is important. Let's not whinge about speed cameras, because there's a huge political backlash about whether speed cameras are important or not. Let's actually focus on the people like Alice, like Clara, like others who've actually had the worst outcome. And the direction I think you're now setting for yourself is the right one. Leadership, commitment. I want to see resources attached to that, so there are more people doing this, part of their day job. And if you look at places like, well, there's Scotland, for example. It's not a city, but Scotland is doing a huge amount of work. I've got a big saying when I worked for the NHS, which was R&D, which wasn't research and development, is rob and duplicate. So Scotland are doing great stuff. London are doing great stuff. Liverpool are doing great stuff. There are a number of different cities. And the key thing that I observe looking in is commitment and leadership, regardless of the interventions that you choose to then do.
Okay, thank you. I've not had any other indications from board members, so we'll move on to Paula and Jill. Paula, welcome. Becky, there's another microphone on.
Yeah.
The system should override this.
That's working. Sorry about the delay.
That's okay, Paul.
First of all, I'd really like to thank everybody for the opportunity for being here. I think with the COVID situation and one thing and another, it's nice to see everybody. I think it's great to have the representation from all the areas as well, which is fabulous. So I'm a little bit like Ian, I'm going to take you back to go forward, but I won't be as long, no disrespect, because I haven't prepared a big presentation or anything like that. I just shoot from the hip and speak from my heart, and that's all I can do. So my son was 19 years old, and he was killed in a road traffic I hate the word accident, crash in Horsforth on the 30th of June 2018. He was in a car with 4 of his best friends, Kaylin, Matty, Brandon, and my son Declan. There were 6 of them in his car. Silly boys. 2 of which obviously wouldn't have had a seatbelt on. So they were travelling 5 minutes from a party home, literally, down Rawdon Road in Horsforth. It is literally 5 minutes from that party to home. Within that 5 minutes, and I refer to 5 minutes a lot because obviously there'll be things that I've been doing that actually refer to the 5 minutes. And they were speeding up. They were travelling at speed. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. There was no traffic about, so they thought they'd gone up to Rawdon roundabout, gone across it. The lights was in their favour and green, and they shot over the traffic lights, passed onto the inner ring road. And on that bend, what they didn't realise was there was a taxi driver on his way home, coming the other side of the road. Because of the weight in the vehicle, the car careered to the right on the bend, which meant that they couldn't rectify. So even Lewis Hamilton would have had a problem trying to rectify on that bend. So I know I make joke of that, but actually it's a fact. They could not have. There's no way they would have been able to stop that accident happening because they'd lost control of the vehicle because of the weight inside it. Take responsibility for that. That's what we know. That's the fact. So they collided head on with the taxi driver who was travelling at 30 miles an hour on his way home after probably a very heavy shift. And he was probably pushed back probably 50, 60 metres up the road due to the impact of the collision. The car was then turned round, spun the other way, and this was all outside Bank Gardens, just on the bottom of, just on the corner of Broadway in Horsforth. It was represented well on Sky News and everywhere else, and there was lots of people wanting to get interviews from us and one thing and another. But what I will say is, you know, I shout out to the people that I remember and will always remember. And for me, it was our police liaison team. Without them, without the support we had from West Yorkshire Police at that time, Jill will agree, we, could not have got through those first critical days. I still remember the morning. So I was woken up at 4:40 a.m. The accident had happened about 2:30 in the morning. I was woken up at 4:40 by a knock on the door, the dreaded knock that you get, and somebody asking me if I knew somebody who drove a silver Seat Leon. Well, my son he drove a little silver Corsa. So I'm thinking, well, they've got the wrong car, don't know. I'm half asleep. My little one, who was 10 at the time, was fast asleep. My daughter, who was older, she was 23 at the time, was fast asleep. And they walked in and just explained to me that my son had died at the side of the road in Horsforth. It was death on impact, as had three of his best friends, Matty, Brandon, and Caelan. Caelan was thrown out. Well, I don't know how to explain it in words, but he was exterior to the car, out the front, out the windscreen, and obviously severed from the steering column. So part of his body was outside of the car and part of it was inside. Sorry for the graphics, but it paints the picture. And the two girls, Robin had lost the top of her head. So part of her skull had come away with the impact of the car. And Polly, bless her, had her seatbelt on and walked away from the accident. She was sat at the side of the road while all her friends were in this. You can imagine from her perspective how difficult that was, trying to get out of a car that 4 people are dead in and one that's bleeding profusely. So it wasn't a pretty sight. From me and my family, so I look at the family, we've had, I suffer with PTSD. I don't think I'll be the only one. I have touch therapy, which works sometimes and not others. My youngest son ended up through social services having counselling and continues to do so. This is now 3 years on and he still is impacted by it. My eldest daughter will never, ever, when a child, no matter how old your child is, I'm his mum. To lose somebody who you bring into this world, it just doesn't feel right. We bring our children in for them to see us out, not the other way around. And I remember somebody saying to me, have you got insurance? And did he have his life insured? When you're talking about funerals and things like that. I'm like, well, no, why would I? I was 19. I wouldn't, I've got insurance for me, but not for him. And that's always stuck in my mind, that who makes provisions for the kids to bury them? You just wouldn't, would you? So anyway, so moving on. So that was the accident. We then had 4 consecutive funerals, one after the other, at Horsforth St Margaret's. There was massive media attention. There was absolutely, reporting left, right and centre. But ultimately, it didn't change the fact that we lost 4 beautiful boys that were hardworking. They were stupid that night. There's no getting around it. 3 years on, we would agree that is, there's not a day goes by that I'm not angry with him still. I told him off then and I'll tell him off now. I should never have got in that bloody car. Had they made a decision to pay £5 in a taxi, things would be very different. But we are 3 years on, so what's happened since then? So I've been in touch with Break. I have worked with Break and done a lot of sharing our story with children that are in year 11, year 12, just about to start their driving lessons. I do feel this may be, I'm not pigeonholing people here, but the young male drivers do have a lot to be said about how they can not pay a bill or pay, argue with us over paying board at home, but yet can be responsible for one of the most dangerous vehicles that we have on the roads that we work on. And that's okay. We give them the keys and we say, crack on. There you go. but you don't even know how to pay your mobile phone bill. Mum still pays that, dad still pays that. But hey ho. So I've done some work with Horsforth School. I have done lots of work with the fire crew who have come out and shown children at year 11, year 12, what the impact has in these accidents and what that equipment looks like when you're actually being cut out of a vehicle that's been smashed to bits. And I have to say that I referred to the 5 minutes. I'm not as eloquent as Ian with my words, but I'm just trying to get across that I ask of the year 11s and 12s to just give themselves 5 minutes before they make a decision that can change the rest of their lives by, 5 minutes to ring a taxi. Has that person that you're getting in the car with been drinking? If they have, just take a step back, give yourself 5 minutes and think, is that the right thing to do? Should we not just get a taxi instead of getting in the car? So I refer to 5 minutes a lot. And in all my presentations that I do, campaigning wise, that is what I always ask them to think about. Just give yourself 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes can make a massive difference in the choices that we make and the decisions and the consequences that we face. So that's gone on. I also then, moving that on slightly, we moved to the campaigning for, I know it's an inanimate subject, it's a sore point for me. So speed cameras, I know I am pigeonholing myself a little bit around speed cameras. So in Horsforth, and again, I am a local girl, I'm Horsforth born and bred, I've never lived anywhere else. We have 3 speed cameras on New Road side, which is a 30-mile-an-hour road. It is heavily densely populated with restaurants and bars and cafes and all that. You couldn't go fast on that road really if you really wanted to. But there's 3 speed cameras on there, which is fabulous. The inner ring road, which of course is known to West Yorkshire Police, which they've told me, as a rabbit run for, illegal crime and whatnot, travelling through, has seen a lot, and the residents in Horsforth have confirmed it. The speeds that some people drive on that road is ridiculous, but yet there's no speed camera. I was offered one of those smiley facey things. No, that's not going to work. So I did and I asked the young ones, the 17, 18-year-old males that I do have contact with and I do hold these focus groups with. And they just said, well, actually, it's quite fun because when we put our foot down, we can see how fast we're going. And I'm like, all right, so you're telling me that, are you? And they're like, well, yeah, it clocks how fast you're going. I'm thinking this is defeating the object. So yeah, they are a no-go. But I suppose what I would like the council to think about is, if a local resident, not just me, because as Ian said earlier in your presentation, it was very easy for me to think how I feel as a mum. This is my son that's died, my little boy that I brought into this world and should never have seen him go out of it. But am I just the one that's campaigning for things that make me feel better? A speed camera, do you know? So actually, I asked the Horsforth community and I did a poll. I put a poll out through social media and I had 4,000 responses in Horsforth alone that said I was asking them for solutions as you ask for. And I said, what's the solution? Is it extra crossings? Is it widening the road? Is it speed camera? You tell us what you want kind of thing. And 90% of them came back and said speed cameras need to be on the inner ring road. And there needs to be a maximum, speed limit, which there isn't at the minute. So those people responded. I then fed that information back into Jonathan Taylor, who I have to say, Jonathan, from council perspective, you are just wonderful. I'm not a political person in any way, shape or form, but Stuart and Jonathan and Chris Calvert from the local council team in Horsforth have been absolutely fantastic with us from a family perspective, from the start, from the accident happening right up until present day. They've never lost contact and they've never lost focus. So, You know, I've been lucky in that sense that the people that I have pitched to or spoken to have been really warm about it. And the police, again, you know, even the police liaison team that I still have now 3 years on will still help me out in any questions that I have and what I can do. So for me, it's then Break. I do work with Break charity. I'm willing. I have also offered to do some work with the cadets for the West Yorkshire Police about how they can actually have that conversation with a family when they're knocking on the door. That might sound a bit bizarre, but it's things that I feel strongly about and I can make a difference and help. Because for me, I just don't want one more fatality in my local area or in Leeds, across West Yorkshire, or whatever, because a statistic is just a number on a piece of paper. But as you've seen today, a grave is something we visit every day. We go every day. We never get away from that. We've got the pain that we feel every minute of every hour of every day. We have Christmases and birthdays and all those dreaded days that you put a smile on your face for the kids that you have still in your household. But, you know, I want you to really think, I'll get behind whatever you need, whatever we can do from a local perspective, we'll do. And I'm only one voice, but I've got a lot of people voices behind me. So I thank you all for your time, and anything we can do to help drive this behavioural change, for which it is, it's a total behavioural change. Happy to help in any way we can. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Paul. I think you've very graphically described why we need to, I almost said redouble our efforts, but multiply our efforts to avoid the human consequences that you've so graphically spelt out. Jill, do you want to add anything to that?
Hi, 5 o'clock in the morning, I got the knock on the door. You see films, you read, you know, see it on the news, but you never, ever in a million years think it's going to happen to you. And I feel still 3 years on as if I'm in a film. I don't know if you, yeah, so I feel as though I'm watching this woman who's dealing with this. And I don't think it's real. And I do believe that perhaps if there'd have been speed cameras down that road where our boys were killed, I would be making my son's favourite tea tonight.
Thank you, Jill. I don't know whether any members want to ask any questions or raise any issues, but I'm also going to bring in the officers and our police colleagues to respond to the numerous points that Ian, Jill and Paula have raised, as I say, so graphically. But one question I would ask is that I've found this profoundly moving, as I always do when I speak to people like Paula and Ian and Jill. And I congratulate you on the practical education work that you're taking, but obviously you're just one person or two people and there's a limit on what you could do. And I'm just wondering if there is some way we can share these experiences in a way that's accessible, not just to young people, but to targeted at young people in particular, to help you to convey that message more widely, as I think a crucial part of getting the message across about behaviour and thinking twice. It's just one element, but nevertheless, it's a very important one. So maybe that's something for officers to take away as to how we might do that. Film, YouTube, something like social media. I think it would be a pity if we didn't capture the experiences that have been shared with us and the lessons to be learned from them. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. I agree, but first of all, it's been incredibly difficult, I think, for us all to hear what's been said this morning. And if it was difficult for us to hear it, it's unimaginable how it is for you to have and continue to live through it. I think it's important that we've heard both sort of aspects of when these accidents or crashes happen, that there, you know, and I think Paula's right, young people and cars have only got a more powerful need to understand that there are consequences for what happens, and it's their families that are left behind to try and pick up the pieces. I don't think I've got any specific question or anything. It's I think we do need to hear about how officers are going to respond to this. And I think we need to come away from this making some real solid recommendations that we can monitor and take forward. But yeah, it's an incredibly difficult morning, and I just want to say thank you for coming along to share your experiences with us. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. I will bring in John Scrooby and David Smith in due course, but officers, Gary, you're indicating.
Thank you, Chair. I just echo Councillor Taylor's comments, really. It's very powerful what we've heard this morning. So I thank you all for that. I have an 18-year-old son who's just gone to university. And because of my profession, he's passed his test. I see on a regular basis the fatal reports that come into the office. And I try to get the message out to him because he loves his cars. He loves powerful cars. He borrows his mum's car with permission. But yeah, it frightens me to death because of what I've seen. I and colleagues along this table have been to coroner's inquiries into fatal collisions, sorry. And it's horrendous. And I lost a friend when I was at school. And I to this day, I can still see her family and us as kids going to that funeral. But as Councillor Taylor said, I can't imagine what the three of you have gone through. But I do feel it. And if anything, the passion or the commitment that I and the team have, I hope that comes through. And I'm grateful for Ian's comments about Vision Zero being adopted by Leeds. We are, I believe, leading the way. And I would say to our members that the transport strategy that was approved in this room last week with Vision Zero in it does give the policy context for us to move forward now. And it's a challenge for all of us is how we respond to that. The Department for Transport have seen the transport policy and say it's one of the best in the country, if not the best in the country. So, as I say, there's an environment here where we can move this forward. And I would say this, wouldn't I? But given what I've heard this morning, I would like Leeds to be first for a whole series of reasons. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be. But I go back to what I said at the beginning of the session. It does require every member of society to play a role. We as a service, there's a commitment from the team that we will do what we can, but resources are limited. I do have to say that. We can't do it all. But they are very passionate and enthusiastic about what they do. And if they can help, they will help. And if they can't help, there are good reasons why they can't. And it's not because they're just being difficult for the sake of it. It's because there are some guidelines somewhere that means we just can't set that precedent at this time. And it's an enormous challenge, isn't it? Because the technology, for example, is there today to help with some of this. You know, speed limiters in cars can be activated tomorrow. If society wanted it, it's there. But the general public, for whatever reason, aren't ready for that yet because it will be seen as a break on their civil liberties. So it's how we move forward with that. And I think there are multiple elements to it. I do think behavioural change is right at the heart of this. I think we've done a lot of engineering over the years, and I think the police have done an enormous amount of enforcement over the years, but it's how can we stop that moment of, if I may say so, craziness or madness? Because I look back at my life and I can think of moments when, Gary, you were very lucky then. Why did you do that? Another time, another place, and I may not be sat here. So there's transport planning. We've seen through COVID with traffic flows reduced and the cycle lanes and the extended footways we put in. And if you came in this morning in the peak hour as I did, there's hardly any traffic about. It's half term and it feels a completely different place to what it was 18 months ago. That, 18 months ago, I was queued on the motorway to access the Temple Green Park and Ride virtually. There were 2 cars at a junction today and the rest of East Leeds Link Road to Temple Green was empty. So there's an opportunity here. And members, you will feel this, and I'm sorry for going on, but I do feel passionate about this. When we do introduce collectively things like 20-mile-an-hour speed limits or low traffic neighbourhoods, as we have done, there are members of society that are very passionate about it and want more and more. But there are equally members of the community who hate them with a passion and see them as a break on liberty again and want them removed. And so it's how collectively we can deal with that, because I do think there are tools there that can be used alongside all the communication, the engineering and the enforcement. But we've got a lot of work to do. So I'll end on by the one thing an active thing I've taken out of this, or 2 things. I'm informed that we do publish some of the data on what's called Data Mill North, but I think it's a bit out of date. I think the last stats that I've just seen are 2019, so we must make sure that's up to date. And we must make sure that people understand where that can be found, because I've got no problem in information being circulated, because if it aids a debate, then let's have it. And if I get a difficult meeting, fine. That's how it should be. I've got no problem about constructive meetings and challenges. And in that context, final comment from me, the transport planning work has been informed by an expert panel of transport people from across the country to drive it to where it's got to. And just picking up on Ian's comment, I just wondered if an expert panel for Vision Zero, perhaps with members from today actually sitting on that, might be something that the executive board might want to consider going forward. So we're set to come back to executive board, I believe in December, for Vision Zero. And I've just said to Gillian in the sort of margins of this meeting, maybe that's a recommendation that we bring forward as a direct action from what I've heard today. And I'm happy to discuss that further, clearly with Councillor Hayden when I see her next, but and obviously around this table today. But thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased I came this morning and to hear what I've heard. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Gary. Obviously, what we normally do is take evidence, for want of a better description, and then draw up an inquiry report with a set of recommendations. But I see no reason why we can't strike while the iron is hot and pursue your point and make that recommendation as a board at an early stage, so that the participation of people who are able to bring that dimension that we've heard today to the table is included. So I just wonder, I'm kind of making a recommendation on the hoof to members, but I can't imagine that anyone would object to that. So can we minute that we make that recommendation immediately? I think one of the things that we can say as a board is that although we're not an executive decision-making body, we can make recommendations and we can act as a spur to those who make decisions across the board, and that we will continue to revisit this issue. This is not just a one-off, produce a document, produce a report, produce a set of recommendations, then pat ourselves on the back. We follow through and we'll continue to do that. And I dare say in future, the board or its future iterations will be inviting you all back for your further contributions and responses. I think one of the points that you made, Paul, that we did take in, cognizance of at our last meeting, was the need maybe for greater community involvement, and possibly greater community involvement on a more structured basis rather than waiting for a tragic incident, if I can express it in that way, to occur before we start talking to local people about their concerns. So yeah, Jonathan, did you want to come in?
Really difficult morning. I think for a lot of us, and excuse me. I would like to thank Paula and Jill and Ian for coming along and speaking as they did. And I think the important, the one message, a message we've got to take away from this is we sit here today, they moved and feeling sort of something's got to be done. What we haven't got to do is sort of move on to the next bit of business, and this just becomes another piece of business we've dealt with. It's got to be something we've got to take forward and get committed to, and I think we are. I think some of the things that came out in the various presentations, I'd just like to comment on if I can, just to might sort of guide some recommendations or whatever. But I think sort of the branding and what we call stuff is very important. And I think road safety, just that expression, road safety, doesn't actually say what it's about or what we understand what it's about. When I think of road safety, I think of, telling my kids how to look right and look left, and the lollipop lady and whatever it was, the club with the little furry animals and all. That was road safety. It's something a bit soft and fluffy. It's not hard edged like you just described what real road safety is about. And I think branding is therefore important, because I think it's only recently that we've sort of looked at where road safety sits in a responsibility piece. I used to be, before I was on this board, I've only been on this board this season, but before I was on this board, I was on the communities and environment under Councillor Anderson, and road safety was a line in the community safety plan. And we said, well, can we sort of, is that right? And I think it's now here and getting the focus it needs here. But it just didn't have that priority. So I think perhaps if we start referring more to Vision Zero or something like that, rather than road safety, that becomes a better branding, for want of a better word, a better label for it. I was also interested in the comments about how it gets a priority, and sometimes the funding does set the priority. I was reading a paper only last night. It was about the new schemes, some of the new schemes in Leeds, and it was, well, this has got safety money in it. This has got road safety money in it, so we designed something that's road safety. But something else is about congestion, so we design it to reduce congestion. And it's this, you get so much in bureaucracy, these silos that don't actually, and you don't get the cross connection. And something like road safety, I would have thought any scheme should have road safety money. That should be part of it. Or I'm using the word road safety, but you know what I mean. So I think that's an important one to look at. Now, it's probably not something that we can do as a council, but it's perhaps something we could do as a lobbying activity to the combined authority and to government. And I won't go on too much now, but the other important thing I think was sort of the community engagement. As local councillors, we know from our residents where the hazards are, where the worry is, where the concern is. And one of the frequent questions that when someone comes to us and says, this is a really bad road, it's speedy, we take it to highways, and this is no criticism of Gary, because I know he's looking into this, but we take it to highways and they say, oh, well, there hasn't been any accidents, there's no KSIs around that street. So, it's not a priority. And you go back to the community, you go back to your residents on this, and they say, well, have we got to wait till someone is killed before you'll do anything? And the answer, starkly, is yes. That's the way the system works at the moment. It's this accident waiting to happen. But it's the local community that knows that, knows the potential. And can identify sometimes, not always, can't always identify the right solution to it, but can at least identify the problem. And I think we've got to be taking that a lot more seriously. You know, and I hope Vision Zero does turn that approach on its head, that doesn't say, well, we'll wait. But again, it's about criteria, the criteria for speed cameras. We know that. We had a discussion about that at the last meeting. The criteria for pedestrian crossings. All these things are based on, well, what's happened in the past. Has it? So I think that's something we really do have to look at. And the community engagement piece on that is important. I'll stop talking now because I think I've probably said enough. But again, I think, you know, this is probably, I've been a councillor 10 years, and this is probably the most important scrutiny I've sat on, and the one that I really want to make sure that we do achieve something, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. I mean, I think it's an important point you make about our lobbying capacity, but it goes back to something that Gary quite rightly pointed out. This is a political issue in many respects, and there are those, and I'm not naming any names or casting aspersions, who like to portray certain political parties as being anti-motorists. And I think that is a mentality that we've got to overcome, because it's far too easy to temper what you do and what you need to do to address challenges like the number of people killed and seriously injured. You've got to some extent ignore certain lobbies in order to achieve those you know, those outcomes that you want. And I know from my years, and I'm sure this is true of a number of people sitting around this table, that yes, there is a polarization. And all too often it's easy to cave into those who say that speed cameras and traffic calming and various other measures are anti-motorist, but actually they're necessary if we to tackle this. And I'm going to now continue to use the term public health crisis. And I think that's very important. I think, again, we can structure what we do locally. I'm not going to suggest on the hoof at this stage that we can do local analysis and local audits, but that might be one thing that might come out of it through community committees and through community engagement and neighbourhood engagement. So, you know, I think that's something that we as politicians, with a large as well as a small p, have got to grasp and not use this label of being anti-motorist or anti-car when we're taking serious decisions that might alienate some sections of the community who have votes in large numbers, can I put it that way. But I don't know, does anyone want to come back further, our police colleagues or Paul, on some of the things that we've discussed and that have been raised?
I think the conversation this morning has really highlighted where we're going compared to where we've been. The whole Safer Roads agenda has historically been very much driven by learning from somebody else's misfortune. We've waited for somebody to be involved in a collision or accident, as we used to term it, or be killed. And then the huge machine that is the public sector, if you like, has lurched into action, and we've done something about that junction. We've done something a bit more about enforcement and so on and so forth. What Gary described this morning in terms of where we're heading in terms of Vision Zero, and I think it's worth saying, my remit's right across West Yorkshire in the current role that I undertake. Leeds is very much spearheading the adoption of Vision Zero and the safe systems principles that are enshrined within it. Where we're going under that model is very much looking at the whole system. Our aim collectively is to achieve safe mobility. We want people to be able to go from A to B about the daily business, go to work, use vehicles or other forms of transport safely to enjoy life. That's our mission. It sounds really simple, but there are so many stakeholders in achieving that. And there are so many facets to it. Everything from the fabric of the roads that vehicles are driven on or ridden on, to cycle lanes, speed enforcement, the design of junctions, so on and so forth. So what is a very simple mission is a massive feat of coordination across all these stakeholders to ensure that we're not just thinking about rectifying mistakes, we're actually thinking about preventing, where we possibly can, mistakes happening that lead to injury, and also building into this equation the human factor, which is an acknowledgement that mistakes do get made. And we have to, at that point, in this forward-looking, preventative, proactive mode that we are now embarking on, ensure that we increase the chances of somebody surviving when they do make a mistake. So when we talked earlier about Vision Zero and responding to community concerns, I'm not a betting man, but I would wager that most people around this table were thinking speed cameras. That was the first thing that popped into their mind. Well, can I just open our consciousness to the reality that speed cameras are one tactic around achieving safe mobility? There are many other facets to it. And what we need to do is not develop tunnel vision around the work that we're undertaking. We need to look at a range of solutions for different settings. We need to look at changing behaviours as much as physical attributes of the roads that we're actually using. We need to look at alternative means of travel. We need to look at supporting young people to make the right decisions about the mode of transport they choose and the way in which they use those modes of transport. Now, that's in marked contrast to what I was familiar with for the vast majority of my police service. It was very much, well, we know that road's a fast road, so let's stand there and provide a deterrent after an accident's occurred. Well, what we need to do now is actually listen to communities, understand what the evidence base is around risk, and do something about that risk to mitigate it. But as our day-to-day approach to our professional roles, we actually need to think very significantly differently about everything that we do, so that we are factoring in from the earliest possible stage in every decision that we make, in every pound, shilling and pence that we spend, how can we get best value out of that investment to ensure that people don't die, or when they do make a mistake, they live to tell the tale. Now, I'm going to grab the bull by the horns and just talk about speed cameras, because I know it's a really, really emotive subject. As Councillor Truswell said earlier on, speed cameras do polarise public opinion and political opinion. If the camera partnership, which manages collectively the deployment of speed cameras, the yellow boxes on the roadside and the mobile speed vans, if they had their way, we would be much more flexible in our approach to locating cameras. And that's a commitment not just from the police, but also from the local authority representatives. My colleague Nick Hunt sat around the table here. We are very much on the same page. Now, we've laboured under some quite restrictive national guidance in terms of where we can put speed cameras, which has been very reactive, focusing on historic data around collisions and casualties. I've got the privilege of actually working on a national working group on behalf of our West Yorkshire Partnership at the moment to revise that guidance. And the work stream has clearly identified a need to retain some high risk criteria, because, you know, history tells us that certain locations are inherently more risky than others. So it's important that we retain that. But the historic criteria that we work to hasn't allowed us to be proactive in anticipating where there is new and emerging risk. And that's something we're really passionate about. And I didn't really touch on it last time the committee met here, but there is a real opportunity in settings such as the ring road that you described there, for us to create almost a ring of steel in terms of average speed camera enforcement. Now, very often when you put what we call a spot speed camera in a location, people become very familiar with the location of that camera, and they will do what we refer to as camera surf. They'll travel at a normal speed and then basically put the brakes on when they're on the approach to a camera, and then accelerate away when they're beyond that camera's reach. average speed cameras, the technology is out there to actually cover significant lengths of road with that technology. And that has a much broader effect, a much more widespread effect in terms of reducing the mean speeds that we experience on suitable lengths of roads. So that's again another area of development that particularly Leeds, but the other West Yorkshire local authorities are keen to explore. These are expensive assets, and I won't deny that we have to take into account the cost of putting one camera in a location. You know, an installation will cost in the region of £30,000 per camera. And then we have to think about the infrastructure that sits behind that to process the offences that are generated. I joined the police in 1986. I've done that 5 a.m. door knock and spoken to families in situations that you have sadly experienced. Every one of my professional experiences in that vein makes me more committed to prevent this happening to anybody else. And I make no apologies for saying I have no fear of extending the reach of enforcement if that's the way we need to go in terms of casualty prevention in West Yorkshire. And this isn't just Paul Jeffrey's view, this is a view shared by people who work across my own organisation and the other partners in the Vision Zero world that we're now in. So that's a commitment we're making. I am confident that we will shape the national deployment criteria that the DFT are working on at the moment in conjunction with people like myself, and that we will get greater flexibility because that's what we need to do. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Paul. I would say that at our previous meeting, the board was very attracted by the notion of average speed cameras because we all have experienced the rapid acceleration to cameras, the heavy braking, and then the rapid acceleration away. And to some extent, you know, it's undermined the value, but average speed cameras seem to be the way forward in terms of deployment, as well as mobile speed cameras, some flexibility over their deployment, maybe on an ad hoc basis. I know would be welcome in many communities.
Chair, I do like the phrase predictable unpredictability in terms of where we put our mobile speed cameras, and that's something that can have a really beneficial effect on driver experience because they don't know where they're going to encounter a mobile speed vehicle.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. I've got Neil and then Jonathan. Neil.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I think we're all going to say the same thing in terms of Ian and Paul and Jill, and thank you for telling us the stories of what happened to you. It's of no consequence now in this meeting, but my family had a similar incident a long time ago. It's a long time ago now, but nevertheless, I think as Paul in particular said, and Ian and Jill, it doesn't go away. What I wanted to do was just ask whether the police had any comments to make about something, because we were talking here in a way different aspects of the behaviour of young men. And those of us around the table who are men, we know what it's like to be 17, 18, 19, because we used to be that age and we remember it. And I think as Gary hinted earlier, we can probably all look back and say, crikey, I shouldn't have done that. I was lucky or whatever. And I can think of a couple of things as a driver and as a passenger. And bearing that in mind, I know I was quite keen on driving and I ended up doing a lot of driving in my life. But when I was in my 20s, I took the advanced driving test, which I enjoyed. And it kind of treated you not only as an adult, but as somebody who wanted to learn about driving. And you don't hear about it much. And I just wonder whether that kind of thing could draw young men in. They like driving, they like a bit of speed sometimes, within reason. But if they're in control and proper control and know what they're actually doing in a motor vehicle, Is that something which could be harnessed now and made a bit more of?
One option amongst many, I think, is fair to say. I think, and again, thanks to Paula, Jill, and Ian for their accounts this morning. I think, with all due acknowledgement to your acknowledgement of the service that you received, but also how you could see it improving in the future. I think that's been well and truly noted this morning. So thank you for what's clearly a really difficult account to provide. Paul mentioned options, and it's really hard for police officers not to lapse into police speak because everybody starts to switch off. We get very technical. So we have to try and keep it in sensible language, but it's one option. And I think my personal view on this as Ed Chester's is if these deaths were being caused by firearms, then we would be resolving it far quicker than we possibly are at the moment. I know because part of my wider role is helping prepare the response to, for example, and God forbid it ever happens, a marauding terrorist attack in Leeds or elsewhere in West Yorkshire. But I know that we have tried and tested methodologies for ensuring that we respond in the right way to that and negate the harm as quickly as we can. But the principles and the way we approach that are equally applicable in preventing road death. The principles are sound, the principles work, the principles are the same. But more prudently in the respect of road death, it demands the equal participation of everybody. So police, other emergency services, other public agencies, the public themselves, media, political leadership as we seek to solve the problems and prevent the tragedies that we've heard about this morning. Enforcement, intervention, diversion, they are all tactical options, as we would call them, within a wider range of activity. They will appeal to some, but I'm sure we all appreciate there are members of society out there who would blindly ignore and even disavow any attempt to engage them in honourably intentioned behaviour. Again, from my perspective, I think we've got the forum to start generating the solutions. We have the forum to start developing these solutions, and I'm sure some of my other agency colleagues around the table will share my frustration with that forum as it stands. But as we've already heard this morning, there is an imminent change of leadership around that. And Ian, your point about leadership is absolutely crucial here. So there is an imminent change of leadership there, which we fully support. And I'm personally quite enthused by the direction, the clear direction that I'm hopeful we will start moving in the very near future. I can get into a lot of practicalities and police language about the methodology to resolving this that I've already alluded to. I'm not sure, Chair, whether the panel has the time or the capacity to hear that this morning, but I would seek to give reassurances that we do have methodologies that work, but it does demand the equal participation of everybody in this particular instance. And the forum we have with new leadership, I think, is the ideal place to start that. Clearly, it's not promising overnight success. We would never seek to do that, but I'm genuinely optimistic about the improvements we can start to make in very quick order.
Okay, thanks very much. Neil, do you want to come back?
Well, just to ask specifically really about it, has the advanced test disappeared or?
No, the Institute of Advanced Motorists are very much alive and kicking. There are various schemes regionally and nationally which do offer pre-17 driver training. There's one run at Tockwith in North Yorkshire for aspiring drivers, and it essentially gives them the right skills before they're actually able to drive legally on a road. I think at the forefront of my mind is that you tend to attract the people that you're likely to attract on those schemes. It's very, very difficult to make that attractive to somebody who isn't inclined to do it anyway, if you understand my meaning. Now, I think young person driver training, be it advanced or otherwise, does have a part to play. Do I think it will reach the masses? In reality, no, I don't. that will be my answer in short.
Ian.
I have some knowledge that I think might be helpful in Neil's question, which I wanted to share. We had a debate about graduated driving license, which is offering support to young drivers as they start their driving career, that the Transport Committee and the government decided wasn't a good idea in Britain, even though it works very effectively in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, lots of states in America, lots of places. There was a very political debate about stopping young drivers driving. So one of the positive things in a very depressing debate that happened in Parliament, I was actually, don't want to blow my own trumpet here, but I was actually speaking to that committee at that time. They weren't interested in what I had to say and decided that it wasn't a good idea. The good thing is there's a multi-million-pound research programme called Driver 2020, which starts to address some of the questions that Neil's asking in terms of is advanced driving, is restrictions, is a black box, are they appropriate things to start to address and support young drivers. It's not going to report till 2023, unfortunately. So 88 people died in 2019, young drivers, most of which 80% were blokes. So we're not picking on them. That's just what the data tells us. So if there is a lobbying view from Leeds Council, graduated driving license is a really, really good solution.
Thank you, Ian. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. And I think going on from that, and I'm pleased, Paul, that you've sort of expanded on what you were saying to our last session on speed cameras, because I've written down some points here, which I think, you know, is what's coming together towards some recommendations about more education, more engagement, looking at a proactive approach at things instead of a reactive approach. But I think it was Councillor Bentley who said, when residents come to us and say, before anything can happen, does somebody have to die before you do something? And the answer is yes, but we've heard this morning from my constituents that even when 4 young people die, that still wasn't enough to inspire any sort of change. Paula explained where this accident happened, and at the time I lived a stone throw away in a flat behind the Tilbury Carvery on Back Lane in Horsforth, and was woken by the activity around the incident. And since then it has seemed bewildering to me how something so horrific could have no reactive change. And I hope this morning that members of the board who have heard me talk about this particular accident over the past couple of years and have heard me bang on about relaxing this criteria about speed cameras and installing speed cameras for the last couple of years, now, you know, get an understanding as to where I've been coming from. I have to say, I think even my own view as sort of mellowed. As a relatively young driver, I was always thought, you know, speed cameras are just there to catch me out and just there for me to pay me 30 quid fine or send me on the course that I didn't want to go on. And it changed my mind, and I think it changed the minds of a lot of people in where we live. And I think the response that you received on a very narrow social media group made up of people within our community suggests that that's the case. So I'm going to go back, Paul, to what I said last time, and it's not to try and force the issue or anything like that. We do have to be part of the conversation. We hear the experiences we've heard from a couple of people today, but this on speed cameras specifically, it's being looked at now. The criteria is being looked at now. It cannot be looked at. I accept that you all have much greater understanding and knowledge, and you can look at the data and interpret it correctly, and I don't have that technical background, but I do have the experiences of my constituents, and I am elected to represent my constituents, their views and their interests, and I cannot accept that this is going to be behind closed doors. With all the best intentions, I accept that we all want to move to a more liberal approach to the deployment of these things, but I cannot accept that it goes forward without our input, as I said last time, at least from this board, but maybe even wider than that as a council. And I think that that has to form part of our recommendations, that this board sees what comes back from the Department for Transport around this, is able to feed back to officers who were then going to feed back into whatever goes back to the Department for Transport to try and get a better approach at this, because I've described it as sort of like a morbid set of criteria that, you know, we have to meet before anything can change. And I still believe that that's the case, but we have to have a better approach. And I don't doubt that you're working towards that better approach, but it has to be inclusive of those who are the decision makers. Otherwise, I think that's when it loses the confidence of people who maybe are anti-camera or whatever. But if it comes with a sense of elected members have been a part of the conversation, and if they don't like it, well, I would be quite happy to say to anyone, if you don't like that I'm supporting a speed camera or an average speed camera or mobile speed cameras on Broadway where an accident shook our community, then don't vote for me, because you're going to be at odds with what I'm going to say. So I would be happy to stand on that basis. And I think after hearing the discussion this morning, anyone here would be, and I think that engagement needs to include those of us who are elected to represent people here. So I made the point last time, I think I've made it again. So I'd appreciate, Paul, what your thoughts are on that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. It's one of the reasons why I made the point earlier about being able to share and disseminate the experience of real people like Ian and Jill and Paul, and more widely. And I think that fits into part of what you were saying, Jonathan. I think we'll take that as a comment. Yeah. But one question I wanted to ask is, in terms of conveying to us as members and to the wider public, this determination to eradicate casualties, Vision Zero, whatever we call it, but it's the eradication basically of casualties, and to demonstrate that there is genuine joint working. I'm just wondering whether officers and the panel and the group that you've talked about, Paul and Gary, have actually audited the resources available to us. What is the pot that can be dedicated not just to casualty eradication in the short term and continuing to do more and improve on what we are doing, but where is the money to actually roll it out more widely? Because we do invariably come back to the question of resources, and we need to be convinced as members and the public, and I think this is going back to a point that Jonathan made, need to be convinced that we are using every casualty eradication pound, and I'm getting more and more kind of jargon ridden, I know, in the most effective way possible. And I would hope that that's going to be part of the process.
Do you want me to start? Okay.
As you're volunteering.
I'll have a go. So the combined authority, the money gets channeled from government through to the combined authority. We at the highway authorities, then there's a discussion around how the various pots are split, and we are then allocated it on an annual basis. So if you wanted information about the finances that are available, then that would be, I think, relatively easily identified through the combined authority, and we'll have colleagues who Gwyn Owen in the transport planning team is a party to those conversations. So we can provide that information from our perspective and get the West Yorkshire story quite readily. So from the police perspective, and you'll be able to corral your information as well.
If it's okay, I'm going to let you comment on the high level sort of investment of grant money and precept, etc. But from an operational point of view, both in terms of roads policing officers at district level, your uniform cops that are out there in the community, and indeed my own sphere of influence in terms of the speed camera world. It's about initially ensuring that we get best value out of existing resources before we go clamouring for more. Now that, for me, in terms of police officer response, is about putting our police officers where the intelligence and shared information tells us the risk is highest. So we have an ongoing work stream which is actually giving us a much better field of information on which to decide where to put officers on not just a daily basis, but on an hourly basis, because that's really important when you think about it. If we can identify through the various streams of information that are at our disposal, where somebody is most likely to be using inappropriate speed, which junction we know is more likely to have a collision at a particular point in the day, well, it makes sense for us to actually deploy into those areas. Equally, in terms of overlaying that essentially roads policing intelligence, we have criminality in our communities. Now, criminals are also potentially a danger on the roads. So let's actually bring together criminal intelligence with intelligence relating to collisions, excessive speeding, road traffic offences, and really get more bang for our buck out of the existing resources that we have. That's intelligent policing in our book, intelligence-led policing, which is very much focused on known or indeed anticipated problems. So that really is the immediate challenge for us. Let's get as smart as we possibly can with what we've got, and then we'll look to what can we deliver if we secure additional funding. Ed, would you like to pick it up from there?
Thanks, Paul. I think, I suppose more relevantly at the moment, so there will obviously be some budgetary announcements this week, won't there? And comprehensive spending review outcomes for policing specifically will be better known in December, as I understand it. I suppose at that point then we, as an organisation for UK policing, as well as West Yorkshire in that respect, have to work out what we then have available funding wise to deal with the competing priorities we've got across the board. So as well as road death prevention, to name just a couple: terrorism, child sexual exploitation and abuse, violence against women and girls, serious violence, homicide prevention and investigation. So, and I think I said at the previous panel that policing nationally was lobbying for road deaths and road safety to be placed on an equal footing with those crime types and issues of such significance as I've just mentioned. So then based on that collective picture and assessment, discussions and decisions made, combined authority in conjunction with policing, leading to further discussions about whether or not precept increases in terms of what generally West Yorkshire Public pay for policing amongst other public services. All that aside, that increases, as Paul's pointed out, the emphasis on joint working, joint discussions, joint decision making. And I think we said previously that in times of austerity, the temptation, and it's counterintuitive, is for agencies to retreat into their own worlds and try and deal as best as they can with the issues they've got, when in fact the actual reverse needs to happen. So co-location, communication, coordination, better decision making about what resources are allocated jointly to locations of threat. And I accept that's a really broad overview, and clearly the discussions in and amongst that can be tricky, troublesome, but that's not to say that they don't happen. So that's, I suppose, just to sketch out how the next 3 to 6 months will work. David.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what's been said about resourcing, because there's one aspect of this that I think gets very little attention, and that is the resource that is put into supporting victims where bereavement has occurred as a result of a road traffic collision. And that was really my starting point for getting involved in this whole debate, really, as the victims advisor, first to the Police and Crime Commissioner and now to the Deputy Mayor. It was one of the areas of victim services that the Ministry of Justice chose to retain at national level rather than to devolve. Many victim services funding was devolved in 2015-16, but this is an area that the MOJ chose to, sorry, the Ministry of Justice chose to retain. The next thing that happened was that the Ministry of Justice announced that it was to withdraw its only grant in this area, which was a grant it made to the organisation BREAK, which has already been mentioned, for what is now the National Road Victims Scheme. I got involved, my PCC and also a number of others of us, in lobbying. We thought that was horrendous. I mean, it was a tiny grant, you know. shocking, actually, in terms of the overall resource. Goodness knows there is the overall level of resource to victims is not very high anyway, but the resource going to this particular group is particularly scandalously small. So we did lobby very hard to get the Ministry of Justice to change its mind, and the outcome of that was that the funding for the National Road Victims Scheme transferred to the Department of Transport. We're now in the second year of the funding the DFTs provided. And I'm glad to say in both those years it's gone up, although it's still, in my view, scandalously small in terms of the needs. That is not, I don't, in making those comments, in any way want to diminish the role that some other organisations also play in supporting victims, and Scarred here, I'm sure, will want to comment. There's also an organisation called Road Peace, which I know Leeds City Council has worked with and publicised and so on. But I just want to make that point, really, that regrettably, you know, there are historic victims who need support and will need it going forward. Sadly, there are going to be more victims in the future, however successful we all are at prevention. And I just think in the whole resourcing debate, there is a committee, there is a working group of the current DFT review on roads policing looking at this. It seems to be moving agonisingly slowly, but we just hope that some recommendations will come forward from that. But I just think it's a really important dimension of the resourcing debate that is really often neglected. If you don't mind, while I've still got the floor, Paul, I can comment on the sort of political leadership side, if you like, from the West Yorkshire point of view. And I'm really pleased to be able to tell you that literally Monday of this week, a proposal went to the council leaders with the support of the mayor, the deputy mayor, and Councillor Susan Hinchcliffe as the transport portfolio holder within the combined authority, to create a politically led Vision Zero board. This is something that has been discussed with the council leaders, and it would appear there is support for that. However, they're being asked to sign off on it this week to say that they're content for it to go ahead. They're also being asked to nominate a relevant politician to lead on those discussions at the West Yorkshire level from the authority. I'm delighted to say as well, part of those proposals is that there be a public health input. That is one of the one of the propositions that has been put forward. And we've also allowed for direct engagement with those directly affected, with proposing that the Vision Zero board have a power of co-option, which would potentially, if it so wishes, enable it to have some direct involvement. So I think I hope that's a bit of reassurance, that because I think Leeds is providing excellent leadership, but I know from discussions with Leeds officers you would like to see this happening West Yorkshire wide, and after all, the road system is very much a West Yorkshire kind of element. So I hope that's a bit of reassurance that the strong words that Ian referred to, which the Deputy Mayor Alison has used in her meeting with him, are being taken forward into some practical action, which we hope will result in the kind of more focused political leadership that I think we all think is necessary at the West Yorkshire level on this issue. Thanks.
Thanks very much for leaping in there, David. I was going to bring you and John in, and still will, but I wanted to capture the information that we'd received from Paula and Ian and Jill for comment rather than going through a huge screed before we did that. I mean, just coming back to the point of my question about what the overall pot is, for want of a better expression, is really just reflecting on the way the NHS operates. They identify a number of issues that have got to be addressed, and none of them can be addressed individually by one organisation, whether it's a CCG or a trust or the council's public health or adult social care department and others. So they have a kind of joint commissioning approach. Now, that's been going on for some years, and it's not a perfect system, but it's this idea of having a number of partners who identify those bits of the budget that they might collectively deploy in order to address some of the greatest challenges that they face. And that was the real reason behind my question. It looks as though we're kind of moving towards that, but hopefully there's a lot of scope still there. And clearly it means that you can identify priorities which need more resources when it comes to bids, either internally within organizations or going cap in hand to government. So yeah, thank you for those responses. I will, John, belatedly and with some apologies, now come to you. You work for support and care after road death, and the floor is now yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for your invite to attend here today. I'm in a rather unique position because I fall into about 4 different categories in here. I've been involved with road safety partnerships, with road safety campaigning as a police officer as well, and now also with SCARD. So I come with quite a bit of experience. 62 years of age now, and I've probably spent the last 40 years of those dealing with death and destruction on the roads in one way or another. And if I can just go as the young lady beside me that went backwards to come forwards. I joined South Yorkshire Police in 1980. I completed 30 years in 2010. Early in my career, I was involved in the coroner's office in Sheffield, where I dealt with inquests into all sorts of unexpected traumatic deaths involving road crashes, which is where I was really introduced into my interest in it. In 1988, I came to this very building as an invited as the only uniformed police officer to the annual general meeting of Road Peace, who have just been alluded to. That was one of the most horrific days of my police career. I met with over 80 bereaved families, and I was something of a target. And there's some of the horrific tales they've been dealt with by not just the judicial system, but by the police themselves, led me to go back and submit a rather lengthy report to my supervisors. And eventually, my voice was heard that the police were not doing it right. Back in the 80s, the police thought, yes, we do it this way, we do it that way. And it needed somebody to point out that, no, you're doing it wrong. And that led eventually to the introduction of FLOs into the road policing group, or traffic as it was then called. I'm proud to say I was a traffic cop. Since 2010, when I retired, I became a trustee of both SCARD and CAD. SCARD stands for Support and Care After Road Death and Injury. We do what it says on the tin. We offer help through our helpline, which is manned 12 hours a day, 365 days a year. We offer independent legal advice. One of our trustees is in fact a barrister. We offer counselling free in our premises at Ossett, and where possible, anywhere nationwide where we can get the counselling for free or at a reduced rate, we will try and arrange that for people that we've heard on today who have been affected, not just as bereaved parents, partners, or whatever, but anybody that's been involved or affected in some way by a road death. They say that over 450 people are affected by each road death. Now, when you take into account family, extended family, work colleagues, friends, and even the emergency services, I can recall every single time I walked up somebody's path, knocked on their door as an FLO, and given them that news, and it totally wrecked their lives. The police, the ambulance service, the fire service, the doctors, the nurses in the NHS, all of those are affected by each road death, and each and every one of them are welcome to approach us for support. We have support at inquests and right throughout the judicial system. Again, we have a lot of experience. Every single one of our trustees and our volunteers has been affected in some way by a road death. I've explained the way I was affected, and just 2 years ago, I became a fully fledged member when I lost my auntie in a road crash. We also provide information booklets, which we send out to bereaved families as they request them, giving an insight into the legal system, how to deal with each step in the post-collision process, if you like, and there are plenty of those steps along the way. and understanding the rights as the victim of road death or a serious injury. I was also involved 2011 to 2016 as project manager for the South Yorkshire Safer Roads Partnership in their Drive for Life project, which was aimed at, as we heard earlier, on 17 to 24-year-olds, trying to give them some insight into what can happen when that chain of events is actually set off going. We, over the 6 years I was doing that, we presented that to 7,500 students each year in South Yorkshire. So we had quite a good following and some really, really good feedback as well. We also support Project Edward. I don't know if everybody's heard about that. Edward stands for Every Day Without a Road Death. It used to be the European Day Without a Road Death until TISPOL was disbanded. It's now run by Highways England, and they basically are looking at the same thing, a vision of 0 deaths. We appreciate we probably won't ever achieve 0 deaths, but at least we can work towards reducing that by as much as we can. Because after all, Vision 0 means I don't have a job. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Do any members have any questions to John? Katie.
Yes, thank you for sharing your experiences, and thank you to everybody who's come and shared experiences with us today. It's been really, really powerful to listen to you, and certainly this has been one of the most difficult meetings that I've attended as part of this scrutiny, and so I thank you for doing that. So I think it's Jonathan, somebody over there said that if it's difficult for us to listen to, it must be extremely difficult for you to do. So thank you for sharing that. My question was about, you mentioned the education of young drivers, and a few people have talked about that today. Is that something that is going to be a part of Vision 0? And if so, do you have any details that you can share with us? Because it seems to me that if everybody's going to play their part, that's probably going to be quite an important strand.
Councillor, just to let you know that one of the key pillars is around the post-collision response and care. I have worked in partnership with John, David, and spoke to Ian as well, and lots of the other support services that are available. And the one thing that does come out is that there are issues around funding, but also around sharing that message. And those are some of the things that we would like to pick up. I've made quite extensive notes from listening today about actions that we can take forward and include in that Vision 0 strategy. And I think just continuing to work together and make sure also that West Yorkshire Safer Roads are aware of these services too, because I think that's been missing, and that certainly needs to be picked up at regional level. So there's a whole chapter dedicated to this particular subject matter, and I really hope that it does make a difference.
Yeah, one thing I didn't mention, which I really ought to have, is an open invitation for anybody who's been affected in any way by a road death, or for anybody from the council, police, the Safer Roads Partnership. Annually, we have what we call an Oak Leaf service. It's on the 26th of November this year. It coincides, sorry, the 21st of November. It coincides with the International Day of Remembrance for Road Death Victims. It's held at 3 o'clock at Leeds Parish Church. And as I say, an open invitation for anybody who wishes to come, be they, bereaved counsellors, road practitioners, anybody who's got interest, then please do come along.
Paula, did you want to come in?
And a mind blip. I was just taught actually on the education side of it. I think that's brilliant actually. Only ask I would have, and it's just a consideration point, is, and especially because our sons had a lot of friends, a lot. It was ridiculous how many friends they had. But one thing I do want you to think about is the language that you use in order to get them engaged with the stuff that you're doing, because they're not, they're not corporate. They're not going to understand the jargon of this, that, and the other. They want it straightforward, in your face, impactful, bullet points, and keep it relevant to the age that they're at. And sorry, but that is just, and I'm speaking for them, because I know that that's what they ask of me. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Can I just ask that Vicky comes in
Lindsay.
to respond to that? I think she's better qualified.
Thank you. We are currently reviewing all the road safety education at the minute for Leeds. So that's right from the nursery offer right through to post 16. I wish I could bottle you. I absolutely do, because you telling your story today is really, really prevalent, especially to those younger drivers. And that is something that I'm really keen to work with you on. I know you've done some fantastic work at Horsforth High School, because I have spoken to some of the teachers up there as well. So it's definitely something that we want to work with you on. Okay, yeah. So for ward members, over the next 12 months or so, we are going to be completely reviewing all the road safety education offer, updating that, bringing it up to present day, so it is more relevant to our young people across the district, and that is for all ages. Thank you.
And hopefully sooner rather than later, that can involve sharing the experiences which we've had described to us by Ian and Paula and Jill. I hope we don't have to wait a year for maybe that to be set in motion. Katie, do you want to come back, and then Mo?
Yeah, just to say, I think that, Paula, that's hugely important. I mean, I've sat in goodness knows how many assemblies over the 30 odd years that I've been working in a high school, and it does make a real difference. The ones that are impacting on the young people, they walk out of there, as I'm sure you'll have experienced, really having a change in their mindset and thinking, this is how I'm going to do something differently, as opposed to, oh yeah, that was another assembly and thank goodness it's over. So yeah, I think the language, the way it's delivered, who it's delivered by as well, I think is really, really important. I know you can't be everywhere at once, but certainly my experience is somebody who can share personal experience has a really massive impact on making young people think. So yeah, that was one thing. And the other was just a thought on who you're working with. Certainly colleges, sixth forms, but are you working with the universities too as well? Because that would be another cohort of people I think it's worth involving. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie.
I think that's a really great idea, Councillor. What we're doing as part of that review is to look at gaps. Very much at the moment, our focus is on schools, and we need to get the message out through other methods, and that could be through community groups, universities, colleges, lots of different social media, and we have been very siloed in the past, and it has been based really around the schools, and that's a massive missed opportunity. So we will pick that up.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo the views made by the councillors and people on the board, that it's been really heart-wrenching to hear what Ian, Paula and Jill have had to say. And I'd like to share my deepest sympathies with you all, and hope we can all as a board work on this, and as a committee work on this together to move things forward. But I must agree with Councillor Taylor that as much as we try, we had an accident in our ward when I wasn't even a councillor in 2017, and we lost 5 lives, and it was a decision those children would probably not make if they had the opportunity again to make that decision. But it's getting that education through to them, as we're just discussing about how to best educate the children, it's actually, as Councillor Dye has said, is getting the relevant people with the experience, with the language that they understand, and getting people from across all communities, because this is an issue, especially of speeding and careless driving, which is an issue across all communities, and trying to get that through by engaging the other communities that have had similar experiences to Ian, Jill's and Paula's, that get them on board as well if possible, because when people hear the heart-wrenching experiences, they tend to take more notice of that they've seen that's exactly what's happened, and that's a family member talking about it, not just an officer or someone coming to discuss it. And again, I know we've got guidelines, and as Councillor Taylor has been trying for his ward in Horsford to get those speed cameras after our accident. I wasn't the councillor then, and discussions happened with highways. And then once I became a councillor in 2018, those discussions continued. And unfortunately, I don't want to make this into a personal issue, but I think the Highways Department do need to react a bit more quickly to the concerns of ward councillors and the communities that they represent, because we've been struggling since 2018, even though we provided the funding, to not get the smiley face ones, which I totally agree are not necessarily always the best things to put up there. And we were told, obviously, the speeding cameras, it was the guidelines and so on and so forth. So we ended up with the Highways Department going for the vehicle assisted speed signs. They're a lot bigger, and you could have other information on them and so on and so forth. And the Highways Department at the time were very good with us. They said, we'll match fund if you lot pay for one from your ward budget, and we'll match fund one. But unfortunately, we're coming up to nearly 4 years now. That accident happened in November 2017. I know we've had COVID and other issues, but we've managed to get smiley faces in other areas, and we're not looking for a smiley face. I know there's probably been a supply issue or something, but as ward members, we feel very let down that the Highways Department has not put it as something as an emergency to actually look at that. So we've lost 5 young people there, and it's a road, again, like Councillor Taylor has said, that we know the community has told us it's a 40-mile-per-hour road. There's no sort of speed inhibitors there. People at night time, it's empty, there's nobody there, and young children and even young adults would see that as an ideal road to actually speed on, because there's nothing, there's houses, they're set away. You haven't really got any schools on there, so there's no real deterrent or anything to stop you from speeding on there. And we've already had one such accident, and are we waiting for another one where we lose more people or more children until we actually take action? So I hope today's meeting and going forwards with the recommendations of going for I forget the word, was it zero? And providing we actually listen to the communities and the councillors, because we are the people that are actually there, because we listen to the communities and they tell us which roads they feel or deem unsafe and where they know that speeding takes place, because we understand police officers, Highways Department cannot be there all the time. And if they actually listen to the ward councils and the communities that they represent, there's a better chance of being proactive rather than reactive. And hopefully we could get to the ambition of the zero, where we don't have those deaths, and hopefully we could have the right education in place so those children can make those right decisions and maybe pay for a taxi or decide not to drive that vehicle at that speed, because there's enough deterrence that they will know if we drive on that particular road, we're actually going to get caught, or something's going to happen, or we can't speed up on there. So it might make them think before they make those decisions, and we don't have to hear these heart-wrenching stories that we've heard today, and hopefully we could stop others from suffering and the same fate as those children on Stonegate Road, those on the Ring Road, and whether it was near Alton Towers on a country lane, you know. So hopefully we could take this back from this board. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us, Mohammed. I'm sure your experience as ward members is not unique across the city. I know that in my own ward we had some speed indication devices, the SIDs, and they do, as Paula said, have limited value, but I think they do have some value. And 2 of them went for repair and never returned. And when we chased it up, we found that they'd been redeployed elsewhere in the city. So sometimes highways colleagues don't always cover themselves in glory, but that's a kind of minor gripe in the context of what we're talking about. And I think we constantly return to the fact that the more we can project this 3-dimensional human context, the better. And I think that's something that we really need to redouble our efforts to do. Gary.
2 comments. Firstly, Councillor Shazad, I think we had an exchange of emails earlier this week, so we're following up that specific inquiry and we'll come back to you as soon as we can, but appreciate the comments. The second comment, I've sort of ummed and ahed in my mind whether to say it, but I think given recent comments, I think I need to. And I say this in a hopefully helpful way. Some of the comments latterly are being directed again towards what is the Highways and Transportation Service doing? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? You could do this. And that's absolutely great. We will do what we can. But if I may, Chair, go back to where we started from and just remind this scrutiny board that Vision Zero is, as Paul eloquently set out in his presentation, it's about the whole community coming together. We as a society are never going to be able to afford to traffic calm, put speed cameras, treat every road. I can tell you here now, and probably Nick will confirm, that majority, we get emails from a lot of residents, obviously via councillors, and most of the roads are deemed to be dangerous, unsafe, waiting for an accident to happen. My pet's being killed, this, that, and the other has happened. And it's a daily occurrence. So we're never going to be able to address physically those issues on all those roads. And we need to find a way, with local ward members' help, a way of, okay, so what is the problem that's occurring in that community on those more minor roads? And how can we solve it without spending tens of thousands of pounds and waiting for Highways and Transportation to come along whilst they're busy trying to do X, Y, and Z and trying to do SIDS, which is almost an add-on to what they do. So I'm just trying to make that wider point again, because I just sense in the last half hour, it's seemingly got lost again. And if funding's made available, we'll do what we can, we'll resource up, and we're passionate and we want to do it. As I think you've heard on the education side, on the engineering side, and on the enforcement side. But it's what can we all do collectively to address this? So I hope that comment is helpful, and it's been put forward in that helpful way. But I just sense that.
Yeah, I don't think there's any real reason to be defensive, because I think we have got the message that this is something that's got to be done collectively across agencies and across the community. I think one of the points that ward members have made, either explicitly or implicitly though, is to make sure that where there is a concern, we work with communities, even if it's just to explain what the hurdles are, and that we can't deliver the police, highways, whatever agency, but all too often it's a one-way kind of communication. It bounces back off the very inevitable brick wall, and we don't kind of then use it as an opportunity to co-opt the community into those further discussions, and to make sure that people are informed and, you know, and feel part of the process, rather than just as nuisances who come knocking on our door. So I think that's the point. I don't think you should get defensive, because the whole thrust of what we're talking about is that collective approach. Mo, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chair. No, it wasn't a go at the Highways Department, and I totally understand, because obviously being a ward council, we know how tight budgets are and where the money comes from. It was just to say that if you can work better with the communities and the ward councillors, not every road just because a cat has, and the cat will have a very importance to the person whose cat's died, and it's understandable. But we understand, and most of us are drivers, or we use either public transport and do travel the city, that we know where the safety concerns are. That's the point, that if you can work together, and like you said, if there are ways of actually resourcing something or making a deterrent where we don't have to spend £30,000 on a speed camera or on a smiley face sign, which has gone up in price now as well. It's a matter of something that we can communicate, and as the chair has said, it's a matter of that communications amongst the communities, the ward councils and the highways department. Maybe sometimes if you've got a particular issue somewhere, if you could all sit down together and maybe get the police involved as well and say, right, can we get the mobile speed camera out here more often if it's possible? So it's a genuine place where we know speeding's taking place all the time. So that way we're educating them at the same time. Other drivers will tell others, don't speed on that road because there was a mobile speed camera there, we better slow down. And there's some other initiatives that have taken place. I mean, sometimes you could have the children out that have happened in other wards where they've gone out with, that's education for them as well with the police, and maybe the highways department could encourage that more, where they take out the speed cameras so the young children actually get educated at the same time. And whereas the motorists think, oh, actually we might actually be getting a ticket because there's a speed camera out there. So it's not that I'm having a gripe or having to go at the highways department. And I do understand there might have been issues, and I didn't really want to make it into a ward-based issue or anything of that grounds, but I was just saying, you know, sometimes the ward councils try their best. They're willing to put the money from other projects into certain projects, which the highways then are not as quick to implement or as quick to carry on, whereas there's time limited funding for other projects which they get from the government or other places that get done very quickly. But the minor, smaller projects which could save lives in the communities that we represent seem to take a back step and not as speedily looked at and not as quickly implemented as they probably could be. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, just in response to that, councillor, if there's anything specifically that's local to your particular ward area, you can obviously make contact with your neighbour policing teams who do look at local issues and local intelligence. And it might be that it's a relatively low level issue that perhaps is not going to need that strategic safety camera work, but it might need a little bit of an input from the neighbour policing team. So, for example, near schools with the smiley SIDS, sometimes the PCSOs or PCs run it will get the kids with jackets on, and motorists will have an impact on them, you know. And we've 85 officers trained in the district that could use Pro Laser, which is the speed gun, for want of a better word, but it's a Pro Laser device. And then we would then publish that through our social media channels, and a bit of a you said, we did response to that. So it might well be that the officers go out and they target a particular road or area, and there are people that are obviously found to be speeding or not wearing a seat belt. We'll publish those results as well. I have to say that the reaction sometimes on social media is mixed. You've certainly got two cohorts of people. Some will be supportive of it. Some people will be almost anti-police about it, and it tends to sort of sometimes spiral into a bit of a police versus the community, and that's where the messages from the people that have given their evidence today, Jill, Paula, and Ian. Young people use social media. You know, we talked about education assemblies. My lad's 17 and 14. My 17-year-old's learning to drive, and he goes out with me. But they watch TikTok, they watch YouTube, they watch 2-minute clips of people, and they listen to it. They don't watch TV, my lads. And just about bottling this information. If we could get these people here to do those 1-minute, 2-minute videos and circulate it through those right channels, you would then address the driver behaviours that we're all talking about. Because enforcement, once we get to enforcement, we are really being reactive to it, and we're not changing people's patterns and behaviours. And my children say to me, "Dad, put your seatbelt on." You know, I'm just reversing it now. I'll put it on because we've had it in school, so they know and they can influence their parents. And there's that ripple effect, and especially younger people that are going to college, university, studying. Universities we talked about as well. It's getting that educational input through social media, I think, because they don't want to listen to somebody like myself necessarily, but they may well listen to members of the public that have given their evidence today.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Nick. I mean, I think the collective view that's been expressed by members of the board, and I'm sure we're speaking on behalf of the whole council, all 99 members, is that this is an opportunity as we roll out Vision Zero to involve ward members at ward level more proactively than rather are just simply performing that role of taking up complaints and issues that emerge from individual constituents or at community meetings. So it's that active involvement in Vision Zero. What is it? How do we contribute? Maybe there is a role, in fact, I'm certain there's a role for community committees to play in the rollout of Vision Zero. And also we need to take into account the fact that because, and I don't want to get into a political discussion, but because of austerity and the massive cuts that the council has had to make, that highways has taken quite a hit in that process. And we need to be mindful that if we're serious about rolling out things like Vision Zero, we will always have limited resources, but we need to be conscious of the fact that we don't want to be constantly limiting them still further and preventing the rollout of this absolutely critical piece of work and strategy. Paul, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I think, can I just thank Paula, Jill and Ian for coming along. I knew this morning would not be easy, but I didn't quite realise it would be quite as difficult as it is. But it does come down to what we've spoke for 2 hours now, and really it's a behaviour change. Whenever we do our surgery, and I'm going to a forum tonight, and I can guarantee that people will stand up and say, we've had the quad bikes round, we've had speeders round, and we want a speed camera. Nobody will stand up and say, we need people to go into schools and change their behaviour. I can always guarantee that will be the case. I can also almost guarantee that the neighbourhood policing team will be there almost, and they will defend the fact of what they're doing and that it doesn't need a speed camera and that they're trying to catch people and it's a very difficult job to catch people. And I accept all that. The residents won't be quite accepting of that, I'm sure, but it's around joined up thinking. If we're going to bottle the comments that we've heard today, which will be very useful, and also put that together with what highways think. And ambulance technician a lot of years ago said to me, there are no dangerous roads, Paul. There's only dangerous road users. He used the word drivers in those cases, but we now know that that is all users. And in actual fact, if that is truly the case, then highways are sort of exempt from engineering solutions because all their roads in Leeds they think are safe. And I'm sure that Gary hasn't got lots of roads where he thinks they're unsafe and I should be doing things because he would be attempting to do it. But there are still lots of roads where accidents occur, and that's because of users. If nobody used them, there wouldn't be any accidents. But my point really is how we join all this up. If we continue to work in silos, as we've done for many years, and we do it with other departments as well, we'll get nowhere. So my plea is to everybody down that end is try to work together rather than just work in your separate areas. We've got all the police sitting here, we've got all highways sitting there, we've got all victims sitting there. You're not mixed up already. Try to get together and mix that all up. And as elected members, I think we need to get cross-party and work together on these things, not just be in Moortown or in Horsford. We need to look at it across the city. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Paul. I think I will take that as a comment because so much of what we've covered over the last two sessions has been about this move to a more collective joint approach. And obviously, as we produce our report and then follow it up, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. Paula.
Me, yeah, it definitely is me. I've just got a question really, and it is a personal one, if I may ask it. I know I'm in this forum, but I would like to ask it. It's a highways question. And I remember going back to 2018 vividly, as I recall, and I was told that the publication data is always, when I asked about what the fatalities were in 2018, I got the response of 1 in our area. Do you remember, Jonathan? I spoke to you about this. And I said, well, how is that? How can that be right? There was 4, you know, and it was all because there was just 1 vehicle involved, or 1 vehicle that had subsequent passengers. I think if you're moving forward, and we talked about the language that we're talking about, can these numbers be people rather than 1 car? It had 6 passengers in it, 2 were seriously injured, 4 fatalities. If you're going to publish data, please make it relevant to the people that you're speaking to, because it adds weight behind your arguments. You know, numbers are one thing. 1 car is 1 car, but having 10 people in it that died is a massive difference to the data that you see. So that's my only ask, really. And is that true? Is that is how it is put out, isn't it?
I'm not sure it is, because certainly the stats that I see talk about number of fatalities, number of killed and seriously injured. We can. There's a huge amount of statistics you can imagine, can't you, in such things? So you can switch it and have what you want, but certainly some of the targets and information we collect. Sorry, I'll defer to Lindsay, who'll know better than that. I'm
just going to ask Jonathan then, if that's all right, because I remember I received some data. I've got a photographic memory, thankfully for me. And I remember receiving the data back in 2018, and it did have 1 strapline, didn't it, that said this was the information we'd received from highways around getting some road safety things in place. And there was just 1 fatality on it, classed as 1 vehicle. So I'd like to just put that out there.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I do recall it, probably not as vividly as you obviously do. And I generally think that it's how questions are framed as to what answer we do get back. So there was, you know, 1 vehicle, well, there was multi-vehicles involved, but, you know, there was fatalities in 1 vehicle. And I think that possibly might be where the confusion from highways has come from. But I think Paula is absolutely right. The clear indication at every level, no matter what we're talking about, that people are recognised as being involved in these incidents, and not just. And I'm not saying that this is the case, but what it feels like, what is the most convenient number to try and put forward? Yeah, and I do accept that highways do want to do the best, and I'm not going to rehash what has already been said, because we're not here to, and it's been a collaborative approach today, and I've really felt a sense of we all want to do the best and come out of this and do the best. But what is clear is that we all do have to do better, and we all have a part to play in that. So thank you, Paul.
I mean, certainly the figures we receive as a board are the individuals who are killed and seriously injured, but it would be worrying if that isn't replicated at local level, and that, you know, what 1 collision or 1 RTC, however we term it, misses out the fact that there were 4 deaths and a number of serious injuries. It's Superintendent.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I can't comment for 2018, sadly, but I just hopefully want to provide some reassurance that, yes, we do understand the individual casualties, because when we analyse what's happened in any given month, we go down into the detail of what's been medical episodes behind the wheel, so not necessarily as a result of criminal, dangerous or antisocial driving. Sadly, as most people will be aware, some people choose to end their own lives on a road network. So we also understand that level of detail as well. So I'm quite confident from our point of view that we do understand the individual casualties within each of the reporting figures. Yeah.
Chair, if it helps, Paul has just put before me this is more for the minutes than anything else, but the speed camera criteria, which looks at the number of collisions. So that's what it is. So the West Yorkshire camera criteria talk about the number of collisions. So that's why in that particular instance, it was quoted as 1. But we have, without going into monthly meetings, and one of the things that I look at is the number of fatalities, our road safety record, and we talk about that you know, what you're referring to. We don't talk about vehicles, but that's what it is. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, that does sound, I think, right as to what we were talking about, but also I think reinforces my comments earlier that this criteria to get something is so unattainable at the moment, and it's just really needs that sort of input as what we've had today, because we would have gone away sort of oblivious as to thinking that it's not individuals in this criteria who are counted. It is incidents, and if we're waiting for, I think it's within a 3 or 5 year period for 5 collisions or whatever it is without looking, then nowhere is going to get anything at all, and nothing is going to change, and it is going to be just a recurring tragedy, really, of places where we know needs input and needs intervention, but a rigid criteria set by people who aren't in our communities have decided that's the way forward. So another comment.
Okay,
Sorry.
thanks.
Thank
you. The point's made, and it's well made, and it will be recorded, and hopefully we can reflect that in our final report. Before moving on, I'm going to go back to David. David, did you feel as though you said everything that you needed to say earlier? If not, and I'll give you an opportunity. But one thing I would like to ask is, was there a report that was submitted to WICA around the issue that you described to us? And if so, can you share it with Becky, and we'll disseminate it to board members?
Yeah, I've actually sent it to Lindsay already to keep her up to date with what's happening. So
okay,
I mean, as I say, it is a report from the Mayor and Deputy Mayor to the council leaders, but I can't see any objection to it being shared.
Okay, well, subject to that caveat, then I'm sure we would be more than interested to see it. Right, I've got no more indications from board members or other contributors, so I'll draw this part of the meeting to a close and thank everyone who's attended and for your contributions. It's absolutely invaluable in the work that we're doing, and it certainly convinces me, and I hope other board members, that we're going to have to spend a little bit more time on some of these issues before we start the process of producing the report, because I'm conscious of the time, but I'm conscious that we also reserved our consideration of a number of issues contained in the substantive report. I'm thinking about school streets. Jonathan in the pre-meeting raised the issue of crossing criteria, active neighbourhoods, rollout of 20-mile-an-hour zones influencing travel behaviour team. I don't think we can do those justice at this stage in the meeting. So it may be that we need a separate agenda item on a programme meeting, or we need an extra meeting. Whether that's a formal meeting or a working group is something that we can decide. But as I say, thank you very much, everyone, and particularly Ian and Jill and Paula for coming along and sharing your experiences with us, even so far down the line. It clearly was very traumatic and very painful, and I think that registered with us and will continue to register with us as we move this agenda forward. So thank you very much for your attendance and contribution. Thank you. And if you want to leave, we have almost reached the end of the meeting anyway, so you won't be disrupting us. Right, takes us on to the final part of the agenda, and that's the work programme. Obviously, for information, it will be updated accordingly if we are asked to look at anything else or receive any referrals. And as I say, I think we are going to need 1 or 2 meetings to pursue this agenda to its natural conclusion. But I will consult members as to how and when you want us to do that. I don't think we should be overloading the meetings we've already got programmed to try and shoehorn things into those. But again, I'm in the hands of members. So thanks very much for your contribution. I think it's been a really, really good and long overdue session.
Thank you, Chair.